Have you ever set a New Year's resolution and been convinced that this year you're actually going to stick to it, only to find yourself failing a couple of weeks later and not following through? If so, then you're not the only one. 80% of people quit their New Year's resolutions by February. So how can we change that? How can we make sure that we actually set our goals in a way that actually makes us stick to our goals? Today I am going to show you 5 tips how you can set your goals in a way that will make you more likely to actually follow through. So the first thing you want to keep in mind is that you want to set process-oriented goals, not result-oriented goals, because our results can only be influenced indirectly. However, our process, our behaviour can be influenced directly. And as Stephen R. Covey points out, we always want to make sure we focus on our circle of influence, that we only focus on those things we can influence, that we are proactive. And either way, you can't expect results from doing nothing. As Albert Einstein points out, insanity is thinking something's going to change by doing the same thing over and over again. You can either have excuses or results, not both. Vision without a strategy is nothing but an illusion. However, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't have an outcome. Rather the opposite, you need to have an outcome in mind. Otherwise, how are you going to know whether the process you're using is actually working? How are you going to test if your process actually gives you the result that you want if you don't even know which kind of result you want? James Clear points out that if you have an outcome, then you'll be unhappy. And I suppose that makes sense because you tend to, when you set yourself an outcome, compare yourself with the ideal, but you don't need to do it that way. Instead of measuring the gap between now and your ideal self, you can simply choose to measure the gain between your former self and where you're at now. That will motivate you to go further and won't make you unhappy. Once you've decided what your outcome is going to be, then you can reverse engineer how you're going to do that. The next tip would be that you need to have a deadline. As Tony Robbins says, a goal is simply a dream with a deadline. Deadlines are very important because they give us this sense of urgency. As Will Durin puts it, the ability of the average person can be doubled if the situation demands it. So if the situation demands it by you having a deadline and therefore that you have to quickly do it, then your ability will be increased by far. However, you want to make sure you don't only track your results but also your behaviour. For example, when you try building a new habit, tick every day you actually manage to put that habit that you want to build into action. Every time you then manage to do so, you feel proud of yourself, you feel confident, and this pride and confidence will reward you, first of all, but what it will also do is, secondly, motivate you and give you enough confidence that you think you can take on even bigger challenges because you've already proven to yourself that you can do it. Another method that I would really recommend is the WHOOP method. So WHOOP simply stands for wish, outcome, obstacle and plan. So wish and outcome, I don't really have to explain those very well. Wish simply, for example, I want to lose weight, and outcome would be the specific number you're trying to reach. What's more important, or what makes this WHOOP method so effective, are the next 2 steps, the obstacle and the plan. So the obstacle, what you do there is simply write all the ways down in which you could be hindered from taking action towards your goal. And then when you've thought about what the obstacles may be, you make a plan and create a plan around every single obstacle so that when the obstacle does arise, you're already prepared because you thought about how you'd react beforehand. This helps a lot when it comes to decision fatigue because decision fatigue is this state in which you've got so many options, so many different opportunities that you're not sure what to choose, and it really drains you because you don't really know which one of these to choose. And by making a decision beforehand, you simply don't have this problem anymore. So through being realistic and pessimistic of all the things that could happen in the worst case scenario, you can now be optimistic about handling the situation when things go tough, that you'll be able to handle it, that you'll be able to deal it because you have already kind of experienced that, not in reality, but at least in your imagination. So through being so pessimistic, you can be sure that you can be optimistic when that what you feared may happen does happen. Tim Ferriss has a very, very similar method to the WALK method, which would be fear setting. So instead of calling it goal setting, he calls it fear setting. The reason being that instead of writing down why he wanted and all that kind of stuff, he will write down what he fears may go wrong if he tries. And then he would also think about how he can repair the damage if it does go wrong, which is, as I said, very, very similar to the WALK method, especially when it comes to the obstacle and the plan. The last and perhaps the most important step is to also recognise what you feel will happen if you don't change, because if we don't change, for example, we might feel regret or be unhealthy. When you create a plan, there are a couple things that you need to consider. You want to schedule a time and a place where you want to do it, since, as I've already explained, decision making is the only way to prevent decision fatigue. And let's be real, if you don't schedule when you're going to do this habit beforehand, it's going to simply end up as one of those many, many things that you'll simply do someday, and then for some reason that someday never really happens. When you create your plans, you want to always choose simplicity over complexity, because complexity is the enemy of execution. However, when I say that you want to have simple goals, that doesn't mean vague goals. Simply saying, I want to lose weight or I want to exercise more isn't really going to get you any further because you haven't really set a target for yourself. But when exactly or how exactly do you know if the goal you set for yourself is too easy or too difficult? Most people may think that the perfect challenge to skill ratio is about 100%, but actually that wouldn't get you any further. It's much better if the skill to challenge ratio is 50%. The reason is that if you know that you're going to manage to be able to do something for sure, and you're 100% sure you can manage, then once you've actually achieved that goal, it won't be as rewarding because it's something that you knew from the very start that you'd be able to achieve. However, if you're not sure whether you'll manage and then you actually manage, then you're proud of yourself. In a study with monkeys who had to press a lever 10 times to get a reward, after they'd learned that they'd get the reward after pressing the lever 10 times, if they got the reward 100% of the time that they pressed the lever, they wouldn't release as much dopamine as if there only was a 50% probability that they'd get the reward. In contrast to the 100% scenario, in the 50% scenario, dopamine is also released in the time span between working and getting the reward, which is why more dopamine in general is released. And it's exactly the same when we go about our own goals. So quickly to sum up, to set better goals, set process-oriented goals. Also, you need to define a very clear outcome. Next, you need to have a deadline. You need to also track your behaviour, use the WHOOP method as well as Tim Ferriss' way of setting goals. So if you're setting, schedule a time and a place. Always try to make your goals as simple as possible, and always try to set your goal up so that it's a 50% challenge to skill ratio.